Greetings, everyone, and welcome. It's Sunday once more, and that means it's time for another episode of the Captain's Table. In last week's episode, I was settling into my position and pretty content with the work situation I was having and looking at some nice overtime and some upcoming overtime. Well, that upcoming overtime did indeed happen on Sunday of last week, where I was basically scheduled, since we're still short a person who isn't working on Sundays, to come in and take the trash and recycling out. Specifically the recycling, clearing it out of all of the recycling rooms at work, putting it in the dumpsters, and hauling those dumpsters out to the street so they can be collected in the morning on Monday. And then 4 hours after I finished that task and ended that job, I got called as part of the on-call to come in and do some additional on-call required work. And that was specifically to deal with the front door of the building not shutting. Now, it was technically actually a fairly easy fix. But because it's on call, I get paid for the phone call, and I get paid up to 30 minutes for driving and response time. That said, when I got there, it was not as an intuitive a fix as I was hoping it would be. I kind of knew what the problem was and what hopefully needed to be the solution in order to solve the issue, and ideally solve it quickly. But wasn't able to do so in as timely a manner as I would like. Still got paid for all of it, and more importantly, it was an absolute learning experience. Plus, additional green flag for this employer, when I called the supervisor to tell him the issue and basically muse about the issue that I was having and why I couldn't seem to get it to work, he offered some suggestions and some walkthroughs that ultimately helped me figure out the problem and the solution that I was having, and I was able to resolve the situation. This made me happy, plus I got paid for it. A nice big fat chunk of overtime coming up in my next paycheck. Oh, so very excited about that. As for the rest of the week, well, the rest of the week started off with me going and looking at apartments on Monday. For those of you who've been following this series will know that my lease technically ended on March 31st and has been legally extended to the end of the 31st of May. And my rent is going up, and I'm basically looking for a cheaper or bigger place for the same price or less. Preferably less, of course. Everybody wants less. So I started off on Monday by going down and taking a tour of some apartments down in an area that's not necessarily known for being, well, the most enjoyable to live. If you're in the Seattle area, you might know the name of Skyway. Didn't realize it was Skyway until about 2 days after I toured the apartments, but that didn't matter in my decision-making process. I went down there. They had 1 and 2 bedroom options available, and unfortunately the 2 bedroom option, which in my opinion had the best floor plan and the best utility room layout and closet space, was about $150 outside of my price range. The 1 bedroom that they had was a very odd floor plan and a little bit small, and because of the way the floor plan was laid out, really made it difficult to arrange furniture in such a way that I felt comfortable and confident that I could enjoy that space. Plus, washing machine situation wasn't the best. Also, the closet space situation was not the best as well. But the real kicker for that particular property that I went and visited was the fact that, number one, they weren't sure my bird would be accepted. That would have to be asked to the manager of the property directly. The leasing agent couldn't answer that and wasn't going to ask for me then and there, which was a little bit of a disappointment. And because I hadn't been employed at my current job for a full year, I was looking at paying a deposit equal to a whole month's worth of rent for whatever unit I decided to pick. That's about $600, $700, depending on the way you want to look at it, more than I had intended to pay for a deposit and a holding deposit. And finally, on top of all of that, they wouldn't let me pay for a deposit with a check. They required that I give them a money order. Not one money order either, two money orders. One specifically for the application fee that they would basically cash right away, and the other that they would consider a holding deposit that they told me not to put any dates on, so that if it didn't go through, if I didn't get approved, I could immediately turn around and go and cash it. That, to me, is a little bit of a shady situation and probably representative of the type of clientele that they cater to that makes me not want to live at that property. So I pretty much crossed them off the list. Went up, same day, toured another apartment on the opposite end of the Seattle spectrum, this time being up in the Greenwood, Pinehurst neighborhood. Very, very far north in comparison. Got to experience what the drive would be like about the time I would be driving up there, right around the 3 o'clock hourage. About an hour before I would be commuting home, if that were the case. But I expect approximate same traffic situation based on what my supervisor has said, and he commutes all the way up to Everett. Now, the apartment situation up there was a bit better as far as guest parking. Now, that other apartment I mentioned, they didn't have any guest parking, and because it's Skyway and the buses really don't run in that area, the only way for guests to come visit you is to drive down there or take a Lyft or an Uber, and I don't see a lot of Lyft or Uber people really wanting to drop off down in Skyway, or picking up there for that matter. That means street parking, and street parking was simply not available at that location, and they didn't offer guest parking. This other location up in Pinehurst, tons of street parking. My God, I found street parking pretty much everywhere I went. And it was all within a reasonable walking distance to the apartment location. The problem I had, however, with this location was, while it was listed at something like 650 square feet, the unit itself was actually only 610 square feet. And even then, I'm pretty sure it wasn't even that, because my apartment is supposedly listed at 700 square feet, and this unit that I toured looked like it was maybe 580 square feet. And while this isn't entirely, out of the question as far as space goes, I can certainly cram in, consolidate, fit into a smaller space. The big factor for me that ruled that unit out was the sheer lack of closet space. And I don't mean just like, oh, there aren't as many closets compared to my unit. I mean, the closets that are there aren't even close to big enough. There was basically a small 2-foot by 2-foot coat closet when you walked in the door. And then in the main bedroom, the closet was a 2-foot deep, standard depth, standard height, but it was only about 5 feet in length. That's not doable, and those were the only 2 closet spaces, with the exception of a storage closet out on the deck. And I'm not going to put in some of the things that I have in my closets into that location. The other kicker that ruled out that unit was the in-unit laundry situation. Now, I've seen some stackables that go into apartments, and people complain that they're apartment size and not particularly big. However, in my opinion, they're reasonably sized. They're not quite full-size washer and dryer, but they are 80% of full size. They're, you know, a good size. The one that they had in that unit was 30% the size of a normal washer and dryer. I'm not exaggerating. I do mean it was tiny, too tiny. I asked them if they might be able to replace it for a bigger unit, and they pretty much told me not gonna happen. Really disappointed by that situation. I still asked for an application just in case the other option I was looking at didn't pan out, but ultimately I decided over the rest of the week that I didn't even want to consider that option. The third option that I looked at this last week, however, was a near perfect fit. It was about 150 square feet more than my current unit. It was in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath situation, small building, top floor, 4 units per building. So I didn't have a neighbor on either side of me. I didn't have a neighbor above me. While I did have a neighbor below me, that's okay. Came with a parking spot that was included. And while the rent was on the high end, it was actually $40 over my max limit. The rent included water, sewer, and garbage as part of the rental total, which meant that technically it was below my limit if you included that utility service into the other options that I was looking at. So I was very excited by this prospect. It was a little bit older than my current unit, but a lot of the fixtures and features and appliances were about the same, so it wouldn't really be much of a downgrade. Plus more space, and we can all use more space. Unfortunately for me, the unit was listed as no pets, and when I called the manager of the building to ask whether or not they would let me have my parrot, my beautiful mochi bird, they told me they were a very strict no pets policy. And so that basically ruled that unit out the door instantaneously. And that was the one unit that I wanted to move on to. Following that situation, I decided, looking at my paycheck situation and now being past the 10th of the month, that I was effectively forced into a situation where I was basically going to have to pay for a partial, if not a full month's rent at my current unit, and I couldn't afford, even with my next paycheck, to pay for a deposit plus a month of rent, even partial, plus a full month rent at my current location for a new unit. After the 4th of May, I could totally cover that because that's 4 paychecks worth of money in my account. Minus rent, that's still 3 paychecks worth of money, and I can totally afford that. So, effectively deciding to hold off on looking for an apartment for about another week or two, and then go at it when I know I have the funding and the money, and I can cover all of the necessary expenses. And as much as it pains me looking at the situation, I may end up staying in my current apartment and just paying that additional cost. And while I can afford it, I don't really want to pay it, and I don't think the units are worth it. But not paying for moving expenses, not having to worry about moving, and having a familiar commute, guaranteed parking, and a guaranteed space is worth a little bit in that respect, and does allow me somewhat to save up financially for potentially next year buying a condo or better. As for work, work was work. I did some unit turns. They were nice and quick and nice and easy, and I liked that. And I did some things that I didn't necessarily like. Mainly, I ended up rehanging a closet shelf at the request of a resident who, because they moved in and things were not completed when they moved in, and because the housekeeping that came in to clean their unit stole some of their items, our location, our manager and supervisor basically bent over backwards and said, yes, we'll do whatever you want, just give us a nice review. And as a result, I got saddled with doing their request, which was rehanging their closet shelf about 8 inches higher so that they could hang their shirts without impacting the dresser below. Rehanging a closet shelf is simple enough, it's just a time-consuming process. Did it, took care of it, took care of their work orders, and so far they've been happy, which makes me happy. And my supervisor gave me all the credit for doing all of that, and all of their praise basically comes directly to me, which is good for me in the long run. Especially because I'm still bucking for that assistant supervisor position, and my supervisor seems like he's genuine and trying to help me get that assistant supervisor position at the location, which would hopefully come with a little bit more pay, which would be nice. Following that, the rest of the week ended up having a dishwasher situation that, after cleaning the filter and then replacing the motherboard, I effectively determined with my supervisor that the motherboard, the filter, they're not the problem. It is the pump motor itself bringing the water into the system that is preventing this dishwasher from washing properly. And because of the lateness of the hour and the day, and the fact that we don't have a replacement pump motor, I ended up having to swap the dishwasher with another one. And swapping a dishwasher is not an easy task. It's fairly straightforward, mind you. It's just, again, like rehanging a closet shelf, time-consuming and a bit obnoxious. Lots of little bits and pieces that you have to disconnect, reconnect in the proper orders, and make sure that you don't accidentally turn the water on. Took care of that. Hopefully the resident there is extremely happy that they have a working dishwasher. And finally, we had another closet shelf situation. This time, the closet shelf fell down. According to the resident, it simply collapsed. My supervisor was basically telling me that, hey, you're going to go rehang this closet shelf at 3:30 in the afternoon following that dishwasher replacement, and I just could not bring myself to physically do any kind of work at that point, especially knowing that I was going to go home in 30 minutes. And I had made a comment to him that I said, I bet that shelf is destroyed. I bet it's fallen down, it's bent, the support arms have been pulled out, all of the clips have been pulled out, and we're basically going to have to replace all of it. And all we're going to do is go in there and measure the shelf so that we can order new stuff. And sure enough, we went in there. As soon as I walked in, looked at the shelf, saw the big old dent that was in the shelf, the fact that it was broken in multiple spots, the clothes hanger line below the main shelf had almost sheared off of it completely. It pulled several of the clips out of the wall. All of that. Turned to my supervisor and I looked at him and I said, I told you so. We had a good laugh about that, and then he went down and he ordered the new shelf and the new parts and requirement. Now, here's the thing. We needed an 8-foot, 11-inch shelf. The length of the closet, 9 feet, but for the purposes of, you know, wiggle room and getting it in there and making sure it fits right, I asked for an 8-foot, 11-inch shelf, so that it gave me half an inch on either end to play with if I needed it. And so that's what my supervisor ordered from our warehouse maintenance supplier. Problem is, the warehouse maintenance supplier did not read our order correctly. And well, they got us the parts next day, in fact, early on, so that we could get in there and start repairing it, which made the resident happy at the time. They sent us the wrong length shelf. We asked for an 8-foot, 11-inch shelf. Turns out their only options were an 8-foot shelf or a 12-foot shelf, and the maintenance team, whoever gets them, is supposed to cut them to length as needed, since they don't do it themselves. My supervisor didn't know this. I kind of suspected that might be the option, but was ever the optimist, and of course it's not my responsibility. I didn't order it, I didn't look at it. So I got up there with the 8-foot shelf and realized it was a foot too short. After installing all of the new clips, and I gave the resident the option. They could either let me install the 8-foot shelf and have a foot gap, and I would make sure that it was thoroughly enforced and reinforced where it should be. Or they could wait for us to order the 12-foot, have it come in more than likely on Monday, cut it, and then get it up and install it Monday or Tuesday. And ultimately the guy was very understanding, and he effectively said we could come back. We should order the appropriate length shelf and cut it down and get it installed so that it's fully installed. Not just for his sake, but for whoever moved in afterwards. I agreed, finished up the work putting all the clips in, so it would be nice and easy if my supervisor decided he was going to go in and do the work himself on Monday, and then told him I'd come back the next day on Saturday to do some touch-up paints and on the patch job that was done in the closet where the holes were. And he's like, oh, hey, well, you're at it. I've got a spot in my bedroom that I'd like done too. So, came back very next day on Saturday, did the touch-up paint in the afternoon, and effectively made that resident reasonably happy given the circumstances. Overall, though, I had a pretty reasonable week, and I'm pretty happy so far. In spite of the fact that I haven't been able to find a good, suitable alternative apartment to the one that I'm in, and that prospect of staying here is looming, I still have until the end of May, technically. Which does, at the very least, give me some wiggle room here for apartment hunting. It isn't a critical priority at this point, and again, like I said, if I have to stay, I have to stay. Going into next week, I'm basically looking at starting a new pay period here, so we'll see how much overtime I get. I'm not going in on Sunday, this Sunday, for more overtime. I've asked my supervisor to take care of the recycling this time around simply because I need to have that day off. I really do. And because next weekend, on Sunday the 22nd, I'm going in for a convention-related luncheon. Basically, it's our board elections. Volunteers are expected to attend and help vote. That's how they maintain their nonprofit status. And since I'm going to go in for that, and I'm probably just drive in instead of busing in like I normally would, I might as well come in a little bit early and pick up some overtime and do the recycling and take that out, get some pay, then go in, get fed, and then go home. Anyway, that's it for this week's episode of the Captain's Table. If you'd like the video, hit that like button. If you've got a comment, let me know. Please, converse with me down in the comments and let me know your thoughts and situations. If you've got a really sweet deal on an apartment in Seattle for less than $1,300 a month, a one-bedroom, at least 700 square feet with free parking, yeah, please let me know in the comments down below. If you find that, you must be some kind of, apartment hunting wizard. If you don't find that, don't worry. I haven't found it either, and I don't think it actually exists anymore. And of course, as always, I'll see you next time. This is Captain Rye, signing off.